I just want to welcome everybody and say thanks so much for joining us. I'm Jane Mahattan, and I'm extremely excited and grateful to have Frank Karimi and Jack Campbell-Klaus of Kounkuey Design Initiative zooming in from Nairobi to Cambridge, Ontario, and Waterloo Architecture this afternoon. This is the second in this three-part series for the spring term and part of the university's Distinguished International Visiting Scholar Program. And we're grateful for the support from GCI Ventures for the funding of these talks. We had a wonderful talk and workshop with Feifei Zhou about Feral Atlas earlier in June, and please join us for a third talk by Sylvia Benedito on July 15th about her new book, Atmosphere Anatomies, on design, weather, and sensation. So as a reminder, please make sure to mute your microphone during the event. But we welcome everybody to unmute during the question and answer period, or you're also welcome to enter questions into the chat during the talk. We've had to switch platforms at the last minute, and so unfortunately unable to provide live captions today, but the video will be posted to YouTube with captioning. In late April of this year, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council announced a moratorium on development in the Haldeman Tract, which includes 380,000 hectares along the Grand River, including our school, the University of Waterloo. This moratorium is a ban on any new building without consultation with the Haudenosaunee Development Institute and asserts Six Nations claim on the tract that was granted by the Crown in 1784 forever. But was instead rapidly mostly sold off. The stated intent, as shared on project protectthetract.com, is an exercise in jurisdiction over lands and waters to replace land exploitation with land stewardship and to respond to climate change to protect waterways and ecologically sensitive areas. Organizers of this event stand with land defenders at Six Nations and are as a form of acknowledgement, making a donation to support the 1492 Land Back Lane Legal Fund. And for those interested in learning more about the moratorium, we'll be sharing a link in the chat. Frank and Jack's talk today for the school community is also incorporated into the second year Theory and Design of Contemporary Landscape course, where we're looking at a range of different scales and approaches to landscape design, focusing on the biophysical and social relations that designers engage with. Kounkuey Design Initiative, which we're about to hear all about, their practice focuses on community-led landscape planning, working with residents to develop amenities from play spaces to sanitation facilities to public parks, and their emphases on the non-negotiability of community participation in equitable planning projects, the co-production of knowledge, and advocacy for the growth of community engaged design work, I think really resonates strongly with so many different areas and kind of practices and research interests that are happening in our school and beyond. And so I think I'm really excited to be able to hear from them and also participate in a conversation. So at KDI, Frank Karimi runs community co-design workshops, develops design strategies for productive public spaces, and focuses on sustainable drainage strategies for climate change adaptation. And Jack Campbell-Klaus is a Kenyan national and landscape architect with experience on large public realm and city development projects. At KDI, Jack is leading the design and planning teams in Nairobi and co-leads the office. So I think we're extremely lucky to have both of them here to talk with us. And I just want to welcome you both and thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thank you so much, Jane. Thanks for the great intro. I'm just going to present a screen that I have here. So maybe a thumbs up from anyone if that's coming through. Yeah, great. Okay, well, yeah, as I said, thank you so much for inviting us as well. We're really happy to be here. And thanks for the introductions. And just briefly, I'll just introduce myself and ask Frank to just do a quick intro. So yeah, my name is Jack Campbell-Klaus. I am a landscape architect, and I'm also working with KDI as the design director here in my...
Yeah.
Frank.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks, Jane. My name is Franklin Kirimi, and I'm a landscape architect by background. I think probably what's not just been said is that I have 5 years experience working around informal settlements here in Kibera. I'm trained here in Kenya as well. And my focus is really on using participatory design to empower communities. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, we're going to run through a couple of slides and hopefully give a really clear sense of some of these ideas that we've just been talking about, actually. And I'm going to start just by describing what this organization that we work for is in a quick way, if I can. So KDI, in a nutshell, it's a non-profit community and development and design organization. We partner with underserved communities to advance equity and to activate unrealized potential in our environments. And we do this through the service areas that we have, the 4 service areas that we have, which are these 4 arrows pointing into neighborhood equity in this diagram. And so no particular order, but we have design and build, which is the service areas that and departments that Frank and I fit into. But we also have plan and program, advocate and educate, and research and test. And so these service areas lead us to work on a number of different project types listed here. And in particular, we work on community-led design of holistic public spaces. So KDI started in 2006 in Kenya, and then has since started an office in LA in 2010, and Stockholm and Coachella in 2015, 2018. And there's around 50 of us between the offices, mostly split between LA and Nairobi. And we have worked in other places in the world, including Ghana, Haiti, Argentina. Here in Nairobi, our team is diverse in terms of experience and training, but also in terms of our backgrounds. 8 of our full-time staff have grown up in informal settlements, where, as Frank mentioned, much of our work as KDI is focused. And one such informal settlement is Kibera, which is this image. And this is where, as I said, KDI started. So Kibera is considered one of the largest informal settlements in the world. It's close to Nairobi's city center, and it's home to around 250,000 people. And like many informal settlements, Kibera is both a site of extremely challenging conditions and also of innovation and ingenuity. As you can see, the housing is dense and of poor quality. Maybe what's not visible is that land ownership is unknown and tenure is insecure. Infrastructure, as you could probably imagine, is utterly inadequate, and these kind of create a high risk environment that really disproportionately impacts children, elderly, youth, women. So basic services are even provided by cartels and not by the city. Rates of unemployment are high, and also crime. So on top of this, Kibera faces unpredictable rains, resulting in floods that bring destruction, disease, and these affect the residents of Kibera more than those more formal neighborhoods surrounding. And maybe just to zoom out a little bit here, to say that at the global scale, and I think maybe some of you have probably seen this before, but at the global scale, it's estimated that 1 in 8 people live in informal settlements, or also called slums sometimes. That's around 1 billion people living in these settlements, and that trajectory of urbanization and it's expected to see 2050. So back to Kibera, and I think every informal settlement or many informal settlements have very different reasons for their existence, which are numerous and complex. But in Kibera, history is a critical factor in its formation. So this image here is taken in 1948 and shows Kibera as a small village. At this point, Kibera was land given without proper titles to Sudanese Nubians who had been fighting for the British in the World War II. And racist colonial planning laws at the time initiated this saga of injustice in Kibera, as it sits just south of a segregation line between Europeans and Black Africans. So these factors contribute significantly to the Kibera that exists today. And this overlay of 2015 structures and roads in yellow and green are overlaid on the 1948 aerial photograph, and just showing how the informal settlement expanded and took up the lands without that clear ownership. And maybe one other thing you'll see from photos to follow is that this land is also steep and crossed with rivers and streams. Fast forwarding to today, we can kind of see how Kibera is now a city within a city. Kibera covers around 700 acres. And also it's important to note that with this pressures of urbanization, it hasn't escaped Kibera, and really the high pressures of development are coming into conflict with some of the needs, the rights, and the dreams of residents of Kibera. So over the last 7 decades, residents of Kibera have created systems and networks that work to a degree with little or no attention from the city. For example, in this image, the streets are doubling as open drains that remove solid waste and sewage and transfer that into the watercourses. However, this missing waste removal system from the city results in hazardous environmental conditions along the waterways in particular. And when those seasonal floods come, these waste-filled drainages and watercourses intensify the risk and impact of flooding. And so just a little bit of deeper dive into this, and interestingly, the experienced flooding is not aligned perfectly with being next to a river. Actually, our surveys of thousands of households over the last few years, and the modeling as well that we've done, has shown that it's not only besides the rivers that people experience flooding, it's also in the very flat areas as well, where there's poor drainage out of that region. So there is a pressing need for action on flooding in the context of climate change and ongoing urbanization. And it's led us as KDI to work on physical and social and economic aspects of flood resilience at the local scale and also at the watershed level, understanding flood risk with the government and with technical partners. So there are many challenges for the residents of Kibera. However, despite these challenges, or maybe because of them, the residents of Kibera are incredibly entrepreneurial. They are very resilient, creating ingenious solutions to the challenges facing them, doing business and supporting each other. And the social fabric that we've experienced over 15 years is extremely strong. There are very high levels of volunteering and participation from the communities, and really for the support of all others. So that maybe is some of the problem and the opportunity outlined. I'll go into some of the foundational ideas about knowing and understanding intimately the context, community challenges and of where we work. So actually, means to know intimately, and so our work is really deeply collaborative with communities. We explore and develop participatory and co-design approaches as part of our DNA, and because we know that that's how transformation can come about. And so from Kounkuey is this idea and principles of productive public space, which has been developed over the years. And this is essentially a holistic urban system that deals with physical and social and economic dimensions. This graphic is based on one of the projects that we'll be talking about today, but the principles are relevant to all of our public space work. And Frank will talk more about this project in a moment. A productive public space will have amenities that are physical, or services like flood protection or bridges, but it also has the layer of providing for socio-cultural needs and opportunities, gathering space, information services, or multifunctioning community halls. And it will be space for income generation, skills transfer, planning for the future as a group. And so each of these three elements feeds into the other. And we continue to apply this approach and hope to create self-sustaining, self-supporting urban systems. So the Kibera Public Space Network at this moment is 11 community managed public spaces across Kibera. And I'm going to try to show a quick video, if that's okay, if this will work. Let me have a go. And actually, I was just giving some background on this, but actually we weren't the final winners of this award, but we did come in the top 5.
When I was growing up as a little girl, one of the challenges that we had was infrastructure. The houses that we lived in were not very safe. When it rained, it would be very difficult for us to even sleep because the flooding will get into the houses.
Kibera is one of many formal settlements in Nairobi. They're not well connected to the electricity grid system. They don't have well connected distribution of water. Looking at the services that are already there, the roads, the sewer, or the water, it's not enough to serve the population in Kibera.
The general concept behind KDI is how they work with the people, how they plan with the people, and how they support the community to solve their challenges.
The story of KDI is interesting. It stems back to early 2006. We were 6 graduate students at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. What KDI really stands for, I would say, is really around the productive public space, really around how can you have good public space, how can you provide some economic sustainability, but also how can you provide environmental sustainability and really begin to build up resilience of a space that people can own and then begin to defend as their own.
So KDI has created a number of sites. There are 11 in total, and they spread across Kibera.
The sites have solutions that cut across from sanitation facilities to gathering spaces, open spaces, play spaces for kids, and also solutions to environmental challenges such as flooding.
Hii site ina provide toilet choo, maji wa bafu watu wanaoga, all kama uko na shughuli ya all na rent unakuwa hapa. Kiosk pia uko na kiosk 2 ambao moja ilikuwa ya vijana wana program ya wimbo, CDs, whatever walikuwa nafanya, ingawa sasa hivi wameenda shule. So imebaki tu kiosk, lakini inasaidia watu kwa wengi. Kupata nafasi nzuri watu kukaa. Watu walikuwa wanapanda sukuma, wanapanda nini? Kitambo watu walikuwa wanaenda huko juu kwanza ukitaka kibiriti ama ukitaka kitu kama unga.
The model serves as a way to empower people in the grassroots level to collaborate and effect change. It shows that you can make low-cost interventions with high impact in an upscalable way.
Trust yenye iko, tuko na trust kabisa kutoka kwa KDI kwa sababu wanajisaidia, sisi ndio tunaamua.
The whole idea was that you'd go in and work together with the community, work together with policy and government, and that really began to build trust.
I've seen so many organizations that work in Kibera that do not do the work the way KDI does it. This work is transformational, this work is saving lives, and this work is what needs to happen to ensure that Kibera is a place where children, women, and everyone else can thrive.
Okay, sorry. I hope that's okay, and it's a little bit of a cheat to use a video in a presentation, but I think that really gets a sense of the place of Kibera, but also shows a lot more imagery than maybe what we'd be able to do in stills right now. So I just wanted to summarize then that the Kibera Public Space Project is a series of public spaces featuring fundamental services and climate resilient infrastructure. And it's brought to life with these small businesses and made more resilient by the network that is created by as it multiplies. The projects are initiated and co-designed and built and managed by local residents. And the sites have reached different communities, forming the Kibera Public Space Network across the settlement. So this in turn brings attention to the neighborhoods and to Kibera, which has given Kibera and also, and the Kibera Public Space Network leverage and power to engage in city conversations. So by putting public space and community voices at the heart of development, the project has helped pave the way for government-led upgrading processes also, bringing key infrastructures into areas where there wasn't any and secure tenure to the settlement. And finally, the project reduces climate risk through these river remediation aspects, these climate adaptation infrastructures, the community awareness that's provided through the projects, and also the safe water, the sanitation, the playgrounds and services. So I'll now hand over to Frank, who will take us through a couple of examples of Kibera public space projects. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I think both the video and the few slides up there, I think I've given a lot of background to this. So I think in this section, I'll just be going through sort of the rationale behind the process of the PPS, which we abbreviate Kibera Public Space as PPS. And then we'll look at two examples, the one Jack has mentioned, and just one more. Yeah, so I'll start with looking at what we consider as the key ingredients of the PPS. And this is one, participation, ideally being able to connect members with their priorities and letting them think and be really part of the process of decision making, since they're really the people affected directly. And really participation offers us the chance to be able to build on that local knowledge and increase the social cohesion and help the members grow their capacity to effect change. The next one is integration. In this case, it's really connecting the different strategies that we come up with, but from a multi-sectoral dimension or intervention, if you can say that. And it's more like thinking that, if you design alone, it's not really enough to bring about the impact you want. And it's really connecting and allowing other non-built strategies to also come into place. So we use design really as a way to set the stage for transformational social and economic initiatives. And the KPSP project sort of integrates this physical infrastructure that we come up with income generating activities and social cultural programming, as we'll look at in the coming slides. The third one is networked change. And this is about connecting members with each other and connecting them with the government and also other agency actors around the city and in their neighborhood. And these connections help them, one, advocate for their issues, but also help connect their needs with each other and to also share ideas. And establishing this network creates new opportunities and also robust structures for city and community collaboration, especially when looking for interventions. Next slide. Okay. So in this case, I'll look at what we find is really the anchor to our process, and this is community participation. So the core design and development of the Kibera public spaces uses community participation as a key source of information and a way to also grow the connection with the community and also come up with solutions. So first, we engage with communities to assess their needs and identify opportunities, and then followed by a co-design process where they're both involved in the built and non-built works. The second one is community, it's capacity development. And in this case, it's really about disseminating information through trainings in site management, business management, and also community organizing. And lastly, we look at also civic agency as a way, and this is about really advocacy, empowering residents and linking them with strategic city actors for them to advocate and talk about their needs. I think although every site is unique in the way we approach, I think over the years we've developed this 5-stage process of doing the community participation process, and I'll just talk through the 5 of them, and we'll see this unfolding in the next slides as well. The first one is the request for proposal. This is where we seek partnership through a demand-driven approach by asking the residents to share their ideas and talk to us about their needs. And KDIA would then provide funding and the technical skills and expertise needed. The next one, we proceed to stakeholder alignment. And this is key because you want to get the strategic allies into the process. So we look at the local authorities, we look to local leaders, and the reason why is also what Jack mentioned earlier about land tenure, that the land is not owned, and there's sort of a common law and common understanding between elders and the wider community about land usage. And then the other one is planning and design. And in this case is really using participatory design through a series of workshops to discuss the community's vision. The community is allowed, it takes this chance to share ideas, and we listen and build a consensus on what the priorities in terms of needs and strategies could be to achieve that vision. Finally, then we get into implementation, where really it's about building a lot of work. It's building work here, and a lot of this is also based on community-based. We try and disseminate as much as possible skills in context appropriate technology to help the residents. Also, they also have a bit of empowerment there through maintenance, where we teach them how to sustain maintenance by giving them skills in either income generating activities, but also the skills in the different materials we use. Then the last one, which is operation, and this goes on and on, is now where we hand over the project to the residents, and then they run and operate the informal, these public spaces through the income generating activities and how they can fund maintenance and keep the sites clean, and also be able to make the repairs by themselves. So I'll look at the first one of our sites. This is the very first site that was started in 2006 with a community group called the New Nairobi Dam. And much of this space, as you can see, was really waste. Both solid and human waste ended up here, and what was once a man-made dam towards the end, where you see sort of a green patch, that was entirely a dam that was meant to provide the city with water. Now the area is full of garbage and it flooded often, and these deplorable conditions were perfect for attracting crime and waste dumping and diseases. Waste dumping and diseases were a bringing point for harm and risk to the residents living nearby. So I think the first stage is the group partnered with KDI to construct gabions, and we started to do land reclamation, planting bamboos around the edges of the river, and the site extends towards the dam. Second, we went into, the group started to develop an idea of a waste composting program coupled with urban agriculture as a way to as a way of starting to generate a bit of income. Yeah, okay. I think the next slide now, Jack. Yeah, so then the other one is also the site. They started to provide, wanted to improve access, so that we also partnered with them to improve access. And I think there's also a future iteration of this bridge as well. Next slide. Within this group, there was a group of women that made baskets, and they also wanted to improve their business. So they asked us to develop a sort of shelter and a shed for where they could dry their reeds and also weave their baskets. So what you can see there is sort of the design of that, and subsequently how that was developed on the ground. You can see on the right-hand corner there, they're still making the baskets. So this women enterprise is still on, and they use that to really generate income. So they proceeded on to now have this, maintain this shed structure, but also wanted to build a community group office. Actually, they did this construction themselves, and they used this space for their savings and loaning and their community meetings. As you can see, there's a bit of progress there, and now you can see this gradually developing into a park that was realized, beautified, and also maintained by the group. Having a source of income, the group then and the group members were able to mobilize the residents and get tools to be able to clean the space and make repairs to the structure. Next slide. I think over time now you find this improvement increased the community surveillance in the area. There's a presence of people, the place was popular, it was safe, and that attracted the group to also start to hatch an idea of how they could benefit from this. And this led the group to hatch an idea to then plan to transform the shed structure that we had earlier into a community hall that they could hire out. So KDI then came in and provided the financial and technical support, and this hall was realized. So the community space now, at this point, I think about 5 years ago, it was hosting a community hall, basket weaving, other urban agriculture as a source of income. And this has been ongoing. This is, I think, around 2016. They had more activities introduced. They have play spaces. They have a sanitation block that was open to the residents for hire. All these really are business ideas and income generating activities to support this public space. Yeah, so I think, so from this state, the community had, through this really small progressive transformation, built up a space that was benefiting the residents. And it turned out to be, I think if you look at the next slide there, a really ambient space that people were open to come and use. It was a public space managed and maintained by the group entirely. And having these supporting businesses also helped them run it on their own without KDI's help. Next slide. So what you can see there is a master plan that was a product of this PSP process. And this has been replicated in other 11 sites. And each element, the physical, social, and economic, is part of this system and helps keep the space, maintain the space, and have a sort of improve the social resilience of the residents. And some other improvements the group has made on this. So for example, number 10 there, that's the greenhouse. Some of these other elements the group has actually sourced for those themselves. So they've been able to continue this without KDI's direct involvement. Other than that, there are still other challenges that come with it. And that's like informal settlements are highly dynamic environments, and they really have to remain very flexible and resilient and cohesive with each other because there are always new things coming up. So for example, we have road constructions that result in demolition of houses and infrastructure and community amenities. We have slum upgrading that is done by the government and does not pay so much attention to the community assets. So the groups are able to sit and continue their conversations on how they can adapt to these changes. I'll use the next example to actually highlight this. So Cargo Group is one community group that we partnered with as a fifth one. And the space you can see there was really a dumping space, and it flooded often from the stream next to it. And people used to dump waste there. There was no access across the river. And we partnered with a group to build up the space. If you look at the next slide there, you can see the space behind the broken bridge that was already started. We'd already built that area. That was a community hall and a sanitation block. But then the bridge was also causing more risk. So further to that, we built a bridge with a group. And now the space was, had a bridge that provided critical access. There was the sanitation block, a community hall, and also some spaces for hire. However, just lately, we've had the government introducing a road downstream to the river. And I think a part of that project was actually demolished. But we saw that what I was talking about earlier, the network of the KPSP and the community advocacy that they've been learning all along has helped them advocate to the government and the actors involved in this intervention on how they do as participants in the change that was coming. So if you look at the next slide here, is one of the ways KDI is supporting the group. We're partnering with the group to advocate for a different approach to improving this space as opposed to having a motorized road down the river. And we can see that approach picking up and is benefiting the community because the government is starting to allow the group to actually be part of this intervention, changing it into a non-motorized infrastructure. So through this project and through this process that we're going on now, we'll see this being a more public space and a space that the community has participated in, not only in developing their own spaces, but also bringing input in government interventions. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe back to you, Jane, I think. And I hope, we can have a few questions and discussions with everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Frank and Jack. Just such a great introduction to your work. And I think, like for me, noticing how I think only in the very end did we see this kind of single drawing of a project. And all along I was thinking about how, as you're describing, both the network and each of the projects, how many steps there are, like how much even kind of talking about the process, I think really demonstrates the complexity and the duration and the number of people involved. And I think for me, it's really interesting to hear the backstory behind the project and the work. I have a couple questions just while people are getting ready to unmute and ask their questions, or put their questions into the chat. One of the things I noticed in the video was, this mention of trust, of kind of like building of trust, and how one of the people speaking in the video mentioned, other organizations that have tried to do similar things but didn't have that kind of level of trust. So I'm really curious about what your experience has been in kind of building that type of trust, and if has it if there have been things that have been adjusted along the way or like major challenges. So that's one. And then maybe I'll just throw a few things out there and feel free to respond to what, whatever makes sense. I'm also really interested in the kind of emphasis on drainage and water, and like curious about both the kind of incremental approach, often like volunteer driven work, and then kind of like the enormity of a lot of water infrastructure. So just kind of curious about the scale of that work and how you address, kind of these different scales of when it comes to water, like thinking about designing with water. So feel free, either or both.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah.
I can respond on the question on trust being a part of the community engagement process. And you're right. I think it takes a bit of effort to build trust. And the reason why is because these residents have been exposed to organizations or people who come in wanting to do things, and they erode the trust they give to them. So they really are not very trusting in the very start, and also feeling that they've been sidelined by the government for not accessing proper infrastructure, but for not being considered when being as they are like the rest of the city in providing infrastructure services. So it's really, but then you look at community participation as a process that really requires someone to trust and be confident that the issues they raise will be considered. So over time, we've really needed to come into contact with the community and really spend a lot of time with them. So the participation process can run for months. We have several workshops. We have a team of community experts who also come from Kibera as well, and also interact with the community all the time. So that has really helped build that trust. Again, also being able to document the process and get to tell them in a transparent manner what is coming next. So how have we planned the workshops? What's going to happen after? How long? How many sessions will this be? And sharing that with them openly helps build that trust with them.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much to add to that, Frank. That's good. I mean, I think I think the only other thing maybe to say to that is that there's a deep mistrust of government as well, because of this lack of services and I think not very little listening that's been kind of going on for decades. So yeah, I think it's been a real journey earning that trust. And I think maybe thinking forwards to, for KDI, we kind of see this model going beyond this settlement, Kibera, and we are working in other informal settlements, and across the world. But even within Nairobi, it takes time to build up that trust, and we're working only a few kilometers away, and those that new neighborhood, we don't have staff who have grown up there. We don't have this 15 years of experience getting to know that place. So it takes time. And then I think to your question on drainage, Jane, I think we approach it from multiple scales, but we are only able to I think we have demonstrated at different scales as well, but more of the kind of built components of what we've done to date have been at a smaller scale, at a neighborhood scale. And actually, I think it would be great to share our NBS nature-based solutions for water management project as well, because Kibera Public Space Project is one of many of our projects, although it is also our kind of flagship first project as well. But yeah, I think with drainage, it's about small interventions and proof through building it, disseminating and sharing our findings and understanding that we've generated, as well as kind of getting perspectives of the community, while at the same time working with the universities, the government, to do proper flood mapping, which is not done in most neighborhoods. And, you know, Kibera has a really substantial flood analysis of the settlement due to some of the work that we've done in partnership with lots of other NGOs. So yeah, kind of a at least two scales of it. If the, you know, it's probably a medium scale in there as well. Yeah.
So opening the mic, passing the mic around. I know there's a bunch of, well, I'm sure there's some questions in the audience. So feel free to unmute or raise your hand or enter into the chat. I know some of the students in second year have recently been kind of working at the scale of a pavilion and kind of like smaller scale community spaces. So I think I'm kind of curious I feel like there's a good affinity here in terms of the scale of design you're working on and the work that Frank and Jack just presented. And I also see Adrian just, do you have a question, Adrian? Is that why you
Hi, yeah.
showed your video?
Thanks so
Yeah.
much for this talk. Amazing work and such a powerful process. I guess one of the questions that came for me is I'm wondering how the economics of the project work, like how you know, how you have a practice. I realize you're doing a lot of other kinds of work. It's a diversified practice, but how do you build a practice on projects like this, and also how is the infrastructure itself funded?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Nice to meet you. So we're a non-profit organization, and I think fundamentally we are research through action, and so the vast majority of our work is funded through grants and donations, essentially to fill a knowledge gap and to demonstrate how things could be done. That project that Frank showed right at the last minute with a very loose sketch over the top of it, that's an exciting project for us because that's somewhere that government might actually come in and fund that part, because that's a government road reserve. Essentially, they know that they can't build it as a road because it's far too steep for any vehicles to go down there. It also it's a dead end at the river. So they agree that it doesn't make sense to build it as a road, and they're very interested in what they can do with that space through participatory design, working with KDI and the community around the area to do a kind of government partnership with the community in productive public space. So that could be this kind of first picking up of where that money should be coming from, because it shouldn't long term really be coming from donors and through kind of donations. It ultimately should be coming through social contract and through the government.
I think also, I know just from experience talking to a lot of students, they're really intrigued by the question of like, what does it mean to be a designer in relationship to a specific community? What are the challenges of that? How is that different from working in a kind of more private design firm whose image is really tied to certain aesthetic or a certain set of images, and so that's why I really would love for anyone to speak up, because I think there is so much interest in the type of work that you're doing and the kind of challenges that comes with that, which I think really does, I imagine, is hard to learn in school. I mean, like a lot of things hard to learn in school.
Definitely, I think there's parts, and I'm kind of, if anyone has a question, please jump in. But while we're getting into that, I think I could offer some aspects to that, and I think definitely from the learning from school versus kind of learning in action here, there's a lot of nuances and components to it which are very hard to understand until you're kind of there, I suppose. and sometimes things are flipped on their heads. And then maybe to the point of, you know, the style of design, I think that sometimes, and actually probably for this audience, we probably should have gone into that a bit more about KDI's approach to design beyond kind of participation. But I think, you know, there's a realization in the journey of many of the designers in KDI that, you know, that there's this idea of designers sometimes as sole author or as kind of design genius, who they create everything in their mind and they understand everything and they can put it down and it's great for everyone. Whereas I think we would, we definitely see a different way, where, you know, I think we really behave more as facilitators of designs and problem solvers with communities and through collaboration. We would argue that we find much more resilient, accepted solutions to problems, and that's how we operate in our design team, but also in our community and research and planning teams as well. So, really trying not to be the source of direction, but trying to be the conduit or this facilitator in getting from A to B, from a community's community-driven priorities. Yeah.
I just have a question about kind of like the whole thing about like co-design, because I think that's really cool. Like, I think it's kind of cool to see how important it is to, I guess foster like the success of the future of the occupants of a project, I guess. And I'm just kind of curious, like, you know, when it comes to like that co-design, is it also like kind of like a thing of like co-learning, and where does the research and the teaching come from? Does it kind of come from like a gathering of experts within the community, or is it kind of more of an exterior research and then teaching from the design team to members of the community?
Thanks, Paul. I think I can try and pick this one up. It's really, you know, the learning is something we're building upon, and it's based on this idea that the users of our space really know very well what the issues are, and they're able to understand and be part of the input. But also, if you want the solution to be sustainable, and if you want people to own it, they would have to be really key in the process. So we've sort of been building this learning and building together. And as you're saying, it's been sort of like cross-learning between ourselves and the residents. And I know we sort of then package this at the end, and also sort of help improve that process. But we've also used several tools of community participation that are out there in the academia, and we put those into practice, tweak them to fit the context, and then use that and see how that works out. We've also, in the last 2 projects that we've run, been able to develop a sort of an evaluation alongside the process. So we have a research team that has been evaluating this process and looking at what's the impact post-intervention of this process.
Adrian has a question. A number of your projects seem to involve channelizing water flow. How is this balanced with naturalization of water pathways? I'm thinking about Kounkuey Yu's work naturalizing existing channelized rivers to create a more porous surface. Jack shared a paper, so it's awesome we all have this reference. Do you want to say something about that, Jack?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And sorry, Adrian, if it's a kind of long answer, I suppose. But yeah, we've come across exactly that question in much of our work, and I guess what happens is we get to these decision points with the community where we have a nature-based option, or we have a grey option, and sometimes the social or the economic or the physical components of that decision make more sense for it to be a grey option. And often I think we know that grey options, or kind of concrete or canalized drainages, often take up less space, and as space is such a kind of high commodity in Kibera, it's sometimes driven by that. But I think, as you see in that paper, we often design with more green initiatives in mind, and there's a whole series of different indicators of why sometimes those green designs don't come through in the end. And it's not just about space, it's also about perceptions, it's also about function. It can also be about the specific designers working at the time. It's about our, the engineers that we're working with as well. And, that, as Frank and I are finding with 2 years working on a nature-based solutions project here in Nairobi, our engineers here really are quite terrified, to put it maybe, of kind of straying away from concrete solutions. So it is a bit of a battle of knowledge, but as well of kind of hearts and minds as well. And that project continues, and I should share that that website to that project as well, which I can do now. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So we are at the end of our session, and there is one question about the process of creating a flood map, which I imagine is.
You were, I wasn't with KDI when we did it, so you might be better placed to talk about that one.
Yeah, I was also just trying to look at some material that you could look into later on this, but I'll try and give a very simple, a really simplified answer to that. So we had one of the projects where we tried to do flood modeling to inform interventions both by ourselves but also by the government. At the moment, the government really assumes a 30-meter riverine reserve, riparian reserve, which doesn't really make sense when you look at it from an elevation perspective or in a sectional perspective, because other things really come into play. So we developed this project with the help of Bureau Happold engineers, and the flood modeling was really collecting data over time by taking levels and barriers on the river section, and then computing that into a model. But at the same time, also going to the residents and marking out areas and to the extent of flooding, and trying to verify the computer-generated model with what the community says. Then now would sort of like resolve the model based on community on the resident account. So there's a model out there. Actually, it's open source data that we already have, and I'll try and find that and share the link into the chat as well for you to look into it.
Well, thanks so much for the questions, and I just want to give you such a giant thank you to Frank and Jack for joining us today. And I think like so much to think about in terms of the process, the complexities of negotiating over time and with so many different actors. And yeah, I just really appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll get to meet at some point in the real world.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.